"Sir, you can't be back here." Virgil Blackwood said it the way he said everything that morning. Clipped, already moving on before the sentence finished. He had a formation to square away, 10 dogs and 10 handlers standing in for 10 men who weren't coming, and he did not have time for some wandering old-timer drifting toward the staging line in a coat the color of dead wheat. Lane Kowalski didn't answer right away. His eyes were down near the grass, tracking the sable shepherd third from the end, the small shift of its weight from paw to paw. "You hear me?" Virgil stepped into his line of sight. "This area is for ceremony personnel only. I need you back past the barrier." With the other Lane didn't argue. He never did. He stepped back the way a man steps back from a hot stove, careful and unhurried, no sudden movement to spook anything, dog or human. His boots found the gravel edge of the path, and he stopped there, 3 feet outside the tape line, hands settled easy at his sides. Virgil watched him go, satisfied, already turning back to the scattered chaos of folding chairs and a sound system that wouldn't stop feeding back. He had a ceremony to run, 10 dogs to stage, a mayor arriving in 40 minutes who would want everything squared away and photograph ready, and he did not have time for an old man in a canvas coat standing where he wasn't supposed to stand. But Lane's eyes were already working. He watched the formation the way another man might watch weather coming in, not staring exactly, just tracking. There were 10 dogs laid out in a loose line near the flagpole, handlers adjusting leads, a young shepherd shifting her weight foot to foot, ears swiveling toward the speaker feedback like it physically hurt her. An older Malinois sat with the kind of discipline that only came from years of repetition, but Lane noticed the slight list in his hips, the careful way he settled instead of dropped. Hip dysplasia, probably. Maybe worse. He reached into his coat pocket, not for a peppermint yet, but for the gloves. They were leather, once black, now the color of strong tea, the seams gone pale where his hands had worn them thin over decades. Someone had resoled the palms by hand, small, uneven stitches, not a cobbler's work but a man's own, done at a kitchen table some winter night with a curved needle and waxed thread. He turned them over once, feeling the stiffness in the left one where the leather had cracked and been mended and cracked again. He didn't put them on. He just held them, the way another man might hold a photograph. A handler near the back corner of the formation crouched to fix a slipped collar, and the dog beside him swung his head to track a squirrel crossing the grass. Too fast, too eager, the kind of break in focus that spoke of a young dog still learning what patience cost. Lane's mouth moved, almost nothing, just breath shaped into a word. Down. He didn't say it loud enough for anyone but himself to hear. The dog settled anyway, a half-second later, as if the air itself had asked him to. Virgil, 20 feet away, snapping at a volunteer about extension cords, didn't see it. Nobody did, except maybe the shepherd with the sore ears, who turned her head a fraction toward the tape line and held it there a beat longer than idle curiosity required. Lane noticed. He always noticed things like that. He slid the gloves back into his pocket, alongside the small paper twist of peppermints he'd carried in from his truck, and let his hand hang low again at his side, fingers open, palms soft, an old habit with no dog left to reach for it. He'd done that so many years it didn't feel like a choice anymore. It felt like breathching. That was the word his late wife used to use. Watching. He'd never corrected her. It fit close enough. The park filled in slow around him, the way it did every year, folding chairs unstacked in rows. A card table went up near the gate with a guest book on it, its cover blue and stiff, a pen tied to the spine with a length of twine that somebody replaced every spring because the old twine always frayed through by fall. Lane had watched that pen get tied on 9 times now. He had never once picked it up. He reached into his coat and found the peppermints by feel. 3 of them, wrapped tight, warm from being carried against his body since 6 that morning. He always brought exactly 3. Never more. It wasn't superstition, not really. It was arithmetic. 3 was what a coat pocket could hold without the wrappers crackling every time he moved, and a crackling wrapper spooked a nervous dog faster than a gunshot. The young shepherd broke first, the way young ones always did. It wandered from the loose cluster near the staging tent, nose down, tracing some scent trail only it could read, until it found the barrier at the edge of the lot and found Lane standing there. It didn't bark. It didn't so much as wag. It simply sat square and correct 3 feet off, the way a dog sits when it has decided a person is worth its attention, but hasn't yet decided why. "Hey now," Lane said, low, barely more than breath. He didn't crouch. His knees wouldn't have allowed it gracefully anyway, and a handler crouching fast was a handler telegraphing something. He just opened his hand at his side, palm up, fingers loose, the peppermint sitting in the creases of his palm like it had grown there. The shepherd closed the last of the distance in its own time, on its own terms. Nosed the candy off his hand with a delicacy that would have surprised anybody who'd only ever seen these dogs demonstrated at fairs, snapping at forearm sleeves for applause. Lane had trained enough of them to know the softness was the real work. Any fool could teach a dog to bite hard, teaching it to be gentle when gentle was called for. That took years. He didn't say much else to it. A dog didn't need a speech. He rested 2 fingers against its jaw for exactly as long as it took to check the whites of its eyes, the pace of its breathing, and then he straightened and let it go back to its handler before anyone noticed the dog had wandered at all. That was the whole of it, most years. He came before the crowd thickened. He fed whichever dog found him first, sometimes 2 if the wind was carrying his scent well. He never approached the tables, never touched the pen, never let his name land anywhere a person might read it back to him later. And when the color guard started forming up and someone stepped to the podium with a folded paper of names, names of handlers who wouldn't be walking home again, names read slow and full so nobody in the crowd could pretend not to hear them. Lane was already 3 streets gone, his truck pointed toward the county road, windows down, working gloves back on his hands out of habit, though there was nothing, because some of those names he'd been the last man to speak them out loud, back before they were carved in granite for strangers to read. He put the thought away the way he'd learned to put most things away, folding it small and setting it somewhere behind his ribs where it wouldn't show in his face. He worked his fingers into the resoled gloves, testing the seam at the left thumb where he'd stitched new leather over old 3-winter's back. The stitching held firm. He'd made sure of that before he left the house that morning, same as every year. Virgil came across the grass at a clip that told Lane the boy had been sent, not walked, over. "Sir." The word came out clipped, already tired of itself. "I told you already. This area is for ceremony staff and registered handlers only." He had a lanyard around his neck with a laminated card that caught the morning light, and he kept glancing down at it like it might answer for him if he ran out of words. General public viewing is past the flagpole. There's chairs set up, programs. "I'm fine here," Lane said. "You're not, though. You're inside the rope line." Virgil pointed, as if the rope needed identifying. "We've got a color guard forming up in 20 minutes in a formation of working dogs that have been trained not to break for anybody. I can't have civilians wandering the perimeter. It's a liability thing." Lane looked past him, not through him, the way he might look past a man to check a horizon. 10 dogs stood roped off in a loose row near the staging tent, handlers adjusting leads and collars, one young shepherd sitting with its ears swiveling at every new sound. Lane's eyes went to the shepherd's feet first. Weight distributed wrong on the left hip, favoring something or bracing for something. He filed it away without meaning to. Old habit. The kind you don't get to retire even when they retire you. "I'm not going to touch the dogs," Lane said. "I never have." "That's not really the point, sir." Virgil's voice climbed a half register, the particular strain of a young man who has said the same sentence 4 times already that morning to 4 different problems. "The point is, you're not on the list. I've got a check-in sheet for family, for handlers, for press. I don't have a name for you anywhere on it." He held up the sheet like it were evidence in a courtroom, though Lane never looked down at it. "I don't need to be on it. Everybody's on it. That's how we know who's supposed to be standing where." Virgil exhaled through his nose, glancing back over his shoulder toward the tent, as if checking whether anyone had seen him handling this quickly enough. "Look, I get it. A lot of folks come out for these things and get emotional and wander somewhere they shouldn't. I'm not trying to be a hard case. But you got to go stand with everybody else, or I'm going to have to get someone from event security." Lane didn't answer right away. He was watching the shepherd again. Its head had come up, ears forward, nose working the air in Lane's direction, though the wind was wrong for scent, blowing crossways, carrying noth, waiting, always waiting, for the moment his fingers wanted it. He didn't take it out, just held it there, thumb resting on the twist of paper, the way another man might hold a coin he wasn't ready to spend. "Sir?" Virgil's voice had climbed a register. He had a lanyard around his neck with a laminated schedule clipped to it, and he kept glancing down at it like the printed minutes might rearrange themselves into an excuse to make Lane leave faster. "I hear you, okay? I do. But I've got a color guard staging in 11 minutes, I've got a mayor's office car that hasn't shown up yet, and I've got a formation of 10 dogs that needs this whole staging lane clear of foot traffic. That's not me being difficult. That's the actual program." "I'm not on your program," Lane said. "That's exactly my point." Lane's hand came out of his pocket empty. He set it back down at his side, low, open, fingers loose the way they'd hung for 60 years, whether there was a leash in them or not. Virgil didn't notice that. Nobody who hadn't handled a dog ever noticed that. He was looking instead at the frayed collar, the wheat-colored coat gone soft and pale at the shoulders, the whole faded shape of a man he'd already decided didn't belong here. "Folks pay respect from the general seating," Virgil said, gentler now, the kind of gentle people use when they think they're being kind to someone slow. "There's a program in everything. You can hear every word of it from back there. I've heard it plenty of times. Then you know where to stand." Off to Virgil's left, 20 yards down the staging lane, Harlan Boone was working his way along the formation with a water bottle and a checklist of his own, though his was mental, the kind a man carries after enough years of handling that he doesn't need paper for it. 10 dogs stood in a loose line at heel, leashes slack, handlers at parade rest beside them, everybody catching the last calm minutes before the color guard came through. Harlan had run K-9 for the county sheriff's office for 11 years before he'd taken this job organizing the memorial, and he still walked a formation the way he used to walk a kennel row, eyes moving dog to dog, reading the small things. He stopped on the 7th dog, a Belgian Malinois, 7 years old, a real veteran of 2 overseas rotations before retirement, steady as they came in every rehearsal Harlan had run this week. Her handler had her at heel, at ease, nothing wrong that the handler could see. But her ears had gone up and forward, not at any sound Harlan could place, and her weight had shifted onto her back legs, tail low and stiff instead of loose. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She wasn't looking at the flags going up on the staging poles. She was looking down the fence line, toward the back, toward the 2 men standing there arguing in low voices. Harlan frowned and kept moving, filing it the way handlers file things, a thought set aside to check again in a minute. "Sir," Virgil said again, and this time there was an edge under the patience, thin as a wire. "I really am going to have to ask you to step back to the public area. I don't want to have somebody escort you." Lane looked at him then, not unkindly, and for just a moment something moved behind his eyes that had nothing to do with Virgil at all, some private arithmetic, some old count he still kept. Down the fence line, past Virgil's shoulder, the Malinois shifted her weight again, a small, restless motion, head swinging half an inch toward the 2 of them and back, like a compass needle that couldn't quite settle on true north. "Sir," Virgil said, drawing breath for another round of the same sentence, "I'm asking you—" He never finished it. The Malinois broke. Not a trot, not a curious wander toward the fence the way dogs sometimes drift when discipline slackens. She came off her mark at a dead run, ears back, tail low and driving, straight through the gap between 2 handlers who hadn't even seen her go. One of them lunged for a lead that was no longer in his hand. His mouth was already shaping her name, some command that should have dropped her to the ground where she stood. It didn't. She hit Lane at a full run and did not jump, did not knock him back. She folded herself against his shins and hip like water, finding the low ground, her whole body pressed into his leg, and then she was pushing her head up under his hand, the hand that had been hanging loose and open at his side the entire time, like it had been waiting for exactly this. For one breath, nobody moved. Virgil's mouth was still open on the last unfinished word of his sentence. Then the 2nd dog went. A Belgian shepherd 2 spots down broke formation clean, no hesitation, as if her leaving had cut some wire that had been holding the rest of them in place. Then a 3rd, a 4th. By the 5th, it wasn't dogs breaking one at a time anymore. It was the whole line dissolving at once, 9, then 10, Boots and leads and shouted names left behind in the grass, every one of them running the same direction. Toward the same man, the fence line where an old farmer in a wheat-colored coat stood with peppermints going soft in his pocket. What is... Virgil's voice had lost its edge entirely. It had lost everything. What is happening? Somebody call. Those dogs are supposed to be... He didn't finish that sentence either. Nobody was listening to him. Lane went down on one knee in the grass, not fast, not slow. The unhurried economy of a man who had done this 10,000 times and never once needed to think about how. He had both hands out now, low, palms up, and the dogs came into them the way water comes into a low place, nosing his coat, his sleeves, the frayed cuffs, one working shepherd shoving his nose so hard into Lane's collar that the old man rocked back on his heel and let out something that was almost a laugh, almost not. Harlan Boone was already moving, cutting across the grass at a flat run he hadn't used since he was half his current age, shouting handler names, shouting hold positions that nobody was holding. He skidded up short at the edge of the pile of dogs and the one man kneeling in the middle of it, and whatever he'd meant to say died somewhere between his throat and his mouth. Because he'd seen that kneel before. He'd seen those hands before, low and open, palms turned up like an offering. He'd seen it in a training compound half a lifetime ago, in a place that didn't appear on any map handed out to families. And the seeing of it now, here, in a public park with a folding stage and a sound system and programs printed on cardstock, hit him like something dropped from a height. No, Harlan said, quiet, mostly to himself. No, it can't. Virgil stood there with his printed schedule crumpling slowly in one fist, staring at 10 decorated working dogs. Dogs with medals on their vests. Dogs that had been drilled for 8 straight weeks to hold formation through cannon fire recordings and flag volleys, and 100 people crying in folding chairs. All of them now leaning bodily into an old man in a farm coat like he was the only fixed point left in the world. That's not... Harlan Boone got there before Virgil found the rest of his sentence. He came across the grass at something between a walk and a jog, the leash coils in his hand forgotten, his eyes moving over Lane the way a man reads a page he thought he'd memorized and finds a line he'd missed every time before. He stopped short of the dogs. He didn't try to call them off. 20 years running a K-9 unit had taught him at least that much. You don't fight a dog's instinct when the instinct is right. Down, Lane said, quiet, almost gentle. One syllable, then a half beat, then the hand dropping low and open at his side, palm up, fingers loose. All 10 dogs went down together, not scattered, not ragged. Together, elbows folding into the grass in a line so clean it looked rehearsed, though nobody in that formation had ever drilled with him a day in their working lives. Harlan made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Say that cadence again," he said. Lane glanced at him, mild, like he'd been asked the time. Down. No. Harlan shook his head slowly. The whole sequence. The pause before the hand. Nobody teaches it with that pause anymore. Everybody's compressed it, quickened it, because some manual 40 years back said latency costs you in the field. Except the manual was wrong, and everybody who ever ran the course after him just inherited the mistake without knowing where it came from. He was talking fast now, half to Virgil, half to the dogs, half to himself. I run obedience certifications for 6 departments. I've taught that pause 1,000 times. I tell every handler the half second isn't hesitation, it's the dog checking your hands still there. I never once knew whose voice that pause came from. He looked at Lane like he already knew and just needed to hear it said. "You're Kowalski," Harlan said. "Lane Kowalski. You wrote the obedience protocol, the one they still teach out of the regional program. I learned it from a photocopy of a photocopy with your name half worn off the header page." Lane didn't answer right away. He crouched instead, knees popping audibly, coat pooling around his boots, and let the nearest dog, a gray-muzzled shepherd with a metal ribbon gone soft from handling, push its head into the flat of his palm. His other hand found the peppermint in his coat pocket without looking, unwrapped it one-handed, and held it out low. "Name's Kowalski," he said finally. "Nobody's called me that out loud at one of these in a long while." Virgil hadn't moved. The schedule was still balled in his fist, forgotten now, ink smearing faint gray onto his palm from where he'd been gripping it. He was looking at the old man kneeling in the grass, canvas coat, cracked boots, hand held out like a place a dog could land, and then at the 10 trained animals arranged around him in a discipline no ceremony rehearsal had ever produced. He wrote the protocol, Virgil repeated, mostly to himself, testing the words for weight, the one on the laminated card, the one taped inside every kennel truck in the county. Everyone, Harlan said, for 30 years. Lane straightened up slow, one hand braced on his own knee, and for a moment his eyes did what they always did. Dropped to ankle height, checking gait, checking weight distribution, checking for the small hitch in a stride that meant something was wrong before a person ever thought to look. It was reflex. It had outlived the war and outlived the years since. It would probably outlive him. Then his eyes lifted briefly to Veer. Then his eyes lifted briefly to Virgil's face, not long enough to be an accusation, just long enough to register the boy's stunned silence, before they went back down to the dogs. That was when the shepherd nearest the flagpole went down. It happened fast, and it happened wrong. 1 second the dog, a black and tan Malinois with a graying muzzle, standing in the number 4 slot of the formation, was swaying on its feet the way the restless one had swayed minutes before. The next second, its legs folded sideways and it hit the grass hard, body rigid, jaw working, paws paddling at nothing. A low sound came out of it, not a bark, not a whine, something in between that didn't belong to a healthy animal. "Oh God, Duchess!" The handler nearest her, a young corporal in dress uniform, dropped to his knees, hands hovering, not knowing where to put them. Around the formation, heads turned. Somebody shouted for water. Somebody else shouted for the medic tent, which was 200 yards away, set up for people, not dogs. Lane was already moving. He didn't run. Running would have added noise to a situation that needed less of it. He crossed the grass at a fast, economical walk, the kind that eats ground without looking urgent, and he was on his knees beside the dog before the corporal had finished asking whether anyone knew what to do. Heat and stress, both at once, Lane said, low and flat, not looking up. She's been standing locked in that sun for 40 minutes in a working coat. It's not a bite. It's not poison. It's a seizure. Don't hold her down. Don't put anything in her mouth. What do I? Clear a space around her. Get the water, but don't pour it on her head. Pour it on her belly and the pads of her feet. And everybody quiet. He said the last part not as a request. The corporal obeyed like it was an order from someone senior, which, in every way that mattered, it was. Lane's hand found the dog's shoulder, not gripping, just resting, weight distributed flat and even. His voice dropped into something the crowd had never heard from him, low, level, almost sung, 3 descending syllables repeated on the same cadence, over and over, no urgency in it at all. It wasn't a word anyone recognized. It was older than the ceremony, older than the program, older than most of the handlers standing frozen around him. The paddling slowed. He moved his free hand into the dog's line of sight, low, palm down, fingers together, and drew it flat through the air once. A single motion, unhurried, the kind of signal that only means something if 1,000 repetitions have already worn a path into an animal's nervous system. Down. Rest. Come back to me. The seizure broke. Duchess's legs stopped their frantic motion. Her breathing, ragged and fast, began to even out under Lane's palm. Her eyes, wild a moment before, found his face and held there. "There you are," Lane said, quieter now, almost private. "There you are." Water came. He guided the corporal's hands himself, showing him where to pour, how much, how slow. 2 minutes passed with nobody in that field saying a word beyond what Lane told them to say. Then, Duchess's tail thumped once against the grass, weak but real, and the corporal made a sound that was half a laugh and half something else entirely. Only then did the other 9 dogs, still crowded loose and unformed around Lane's feet, seem to remember they had been trained for something. One by one, they folded down into a rough sit, watching him the way soldiers watch an officer who has just proven, without a single wasted word, exactly why he outranks everyone present. Duchess's breathing had settled into something steady by the time Lane finally stood. His knees took the weight badly. One hand braced against his thigh, and nobody moved to help him, because nobody there yet understood that a man who could do what he'd just done didn't need help standing up. He pulled the resoled gloves back over his hands, slow, like the motion itself was a kind of putting away. Harlan waited until the corporal had Duchess settled in the shade, water bowl steady between his knees, before he stepped close to Virgil. His voice was pitched low, not for secrecy exactly, just for weight. "You know what you almost sent home," Harlan said. It wasn't a question. Virgil shook his head. He was still looking at Lane, at the gloves, at the way the 9 dogs hadn't fully released their sit even now, eyes tracking the old man's every small movement. 40 years ago, Harlan said, this program didn't exist. There was no memorial, no formation. There was a man who trained scout dogs for a unit that never made it onto a roster anywhere. And when the handlers didn't come home, somebody had to bring the dogs back. He paused. Somebody had to knock on those doors. That was him, Virgil said. Not a question either. 3 times, Harlan said. 3 dogs, 3 families. He drove them himself in his own truck on his own dime because the Army wasn't in the business of grief counseling, and somebody decided a working dog with nowhere to go was a problem to be solved, not a life to be honored. Harlan's jaw worked once. He never told anybody he did it. I only know because my father was one of the men he trained under, and even he only found out by accident years later. Virgil looked at Lane like he was seeing the coat and the frayed cuffs and the low, open hand for the first time, not as things to be explained away, but as things that had always meant exactly what they looked like. Lane had heard enough of it. He didn't turn around right away. When he did, his voice came out even, unhurried, the same cadence he'd used to bring Duchess back from wherever her body had tried to take her. "I didn't train them to find bombs, son," Lane said. "I trained them to find their way back to somebody." He looked past Virgil, out at the 10 dogs now settling fully into their handlers' sides again, the formation reassembling itself without anyone giving an order. Some mornings I was the only somebody left. Nobody spoke. Even Harlan, who had known the shape of the story for years, looked like hearing it plain cost him something. "Those 3 families," Lane said, "they didn't want a program or a plaque. They wanted their boy's dog to walk in the front door one more time and not know he wasn't coming. I couldn't give them their sons back. I could give them that." He worked his jaw, glanced down at his gloves. "It wasn't duty. Nobody assigned it to me. I just couldn't let those dogs sit in a kennel wondering where their people went, not after what they'd done for us." He looked at the guest book, still sitting untouched on its little folding table near the entrance, pages riffling faintly in the wind. "That's why I never sign it," he said. "This isn't my ceremony. It's theirs." He nodded toward the formation, toward the space in the front row, where, every year, the names of the fallen handlers would be read aloud, to dogs who couldn't understand the words, but understood the silence that followed them. "I just come to feed the ones who wander close enough. Then I go home before they start reading, because I already know every name on that list. I was there when most of them got written." Virgil's mouth opened, then closed. Whatever protocol Virgil's mouth opened, then closed. Whatever protocol he had left in him wasn't worth saying out loud anymore. The crowd thinned after the last name was read. Chairs folded, trucks pulled out of the gravel lot one by one, until the park held only the flags, the fence, and the sound of wind moving through dry grass. Virgil stayed longer than he needed to, filling a steel bowl at the spigot behind the folding tables, carrying it out to the dog that had seized, now standing on unsteady legs, but standing. Lane knelt at the back fence line where he always knelt, knees cracking against the cold coming up through the ground. He worked the last peppermint loose from his coat pocket with fingers still creased white from the gloves he'd pulled on and off all afternoon. The leather risoled so many times, the stitching had gone the color of rust. The dog that had broken formation first came without being called. It lowered its head into his open palm and stayed there, breathing slow, the peppermint melting between them. Above the fence line, the flags dropped and lifted with the last of the evening wind, settling finally into a long, unhurried stillness that matched the old man's hand.